Great. Well, thank you all. And it's a pleasure to be here and see so many familiar faces. I'm excited to share a little bit of a story today that really, rather than being in the facilitator's role, maybe share some of my experience from the other side of the pond. And if I can inspire you in any way to take away a few elements and bits from this, because the US system has in fact been able to evolve to meet both the needs of the big boat operators, such as you see on the screen now, but equally some of the smaller operators. So one other thing I just wanted to note before we go further is the US system is fundamentally built on the parliamentary process that maybe we brought over with us in the original days of going over to the US. So being able to share some of those lessons back with you all is really a pleasure today. Next slide, please. Great. So I just want to start with a little bit of a quote and some photos and show the range of fisheries that we've been able to manage under a common system. And really, it's about sharing responsibility for the management of fisheries in a way that balances both economic and social goals, but also ensures the health of the ecosystems and the fisheries resources. And we see shellfish, such as you see on the bottom, those are oyster culture. We have sport fish activity that's very active in the recreational fisheries. In the Caribbean there, you see that's a commercial purse seining operation. We also have lobstering, and then you can see a barge feed operator on one of our large aquaculture installations. All of these fisheries find a voice and find a bottom-up voice through our system. So I'm going to go on now into some detail. Can we have the next slide, please? Great. So, again, why co-management? Well, fundamentally, what we're really talking about is sustainable fisheries as well as sustainable communities. And I took a stab at, what are some of those fundamental elements? And you can see there are 8 elements I've listed here. I'm going to go through 7 of them, it being the 10 minutes that I have, leaving the last one for a little bit of tantalizing thought for you all to think about. But let's go ahead, and I'm going to take each one of those bullets that you see there, and I'm going to show the history of the US evolution as it relates to those items. All right, next slide, please. All right, so the first one here is we're talking about the Magnuson Stevens Act. This is the main law that governs our fisheries in the US, and it ranked right now we're talking about the 3 to 200 mile zone. So this was first passed in 1976, and it did establish that 200-mile zone, and it phased out foreign fishing. That's part of our history books. And, again, it may be a unique moment in time in the UK right now with a similar scene. So, but this unprecedented management system of the regional fishery management councils was rolled out to really enable the flexibility for each region to think about their fisheries as they need to, and really involve the stakeholders, not just as consult, but active participants in the decision-making process. So co-management in the US isn't just the US managers take the advice of the stakeholders and go off and manage fisheries. They actively do it together through this council process. But they also established 10 national standards that were effectively the 10 things that everyone could agree on. Like, we want to manage to, we want to use science as our basis. I'm not going to go through those here, but they do warrant some looking into if you're curious. All right, moving on. So who actually is on the councils, and what does this do? So you see here, we've taken the United States and we've broken it up into 8 regional councils. These are federal: New England, Mid-Atlantic, South Atlantic, Gulf of Mexico, the Pacific, and the North Pacific. We also have Western Pacific and Caribbean islands. So again, very diverse region. And who gets appointed to these? So let's talk for a minute about how a council is staffed. So it's fundamentally a parliamentary process. People are nominated by themselves or someone else. You have to submit a full application. But really anybody is eligible to apply for this. And it's their knowledge of fisheries, their experience in fisheries, that is then used as the basis for whether they get an appointment. It happens annually, and people are appointed for 3 years on the first term. So non-voting members also then include like the US Coast Guard, US Fish and Wildlife, the Department of State might staff the particular region, and then of course our regional administrator from NOAA Fisheries. But members who by reason of their occupation or experience or training are eligible to actually have a seat on the council. Next slide, please. So this is what it looks like in practice. It can be, as you see on the right, that there's a U-shaped table. There is a chairman at the head of the table. There are seats for the public to come in and sit and listen. Their webinars are streamed. The meeting materials and briefing books are all available online, both before and during the meeting. And then there are paper copies sitting there. If you weren't able to get it, you can actively go get that. The other thing to note is the public can actually give comment at this stage. And, 3-minute public comment is one of those ways that the public can have their say, but that's not the only way that they can have their say. So I'm going to go into a little bit more now about how the functioning of this system relates to the inshore pieces. So if I could have the next slide, please. Great. All right, so number 3. We've talked about, we have a legal framework. We've talked about there's representation from the individuals who are stakeholders. And again, not just representation in consult, but active participation in the decision making. Now, the third piece is the fishery management scale really needs to be suitable to the fisheries of interest. And in the US system, we've sort of allowed a proliferation of fishery management plans effectively at multiple levels and scales. And what you see is, if I take this United States map, the councils are reflected in there in sort of the base map, but then you also have state agencies who are doing data collection and enforcement of state waters. You also have 3 large interstate commissions that represent the data collection and aggregators for a region. And they do recommend state and regional regulations. So, for example, the Maine lobster fishery is managed at a lobster advisory council in Maine. That Maine roll-up goes to the Atlantic States Marine Fisheries Commission, and they then manage the fisheries management plan in a bottom-up way, incorporating the state's input. The ASMFC and the commissions then also have a seat on the council. This is now the federal council that takes on both regulations for federal waters, and it considers joint issues as they relate to interregional treaties, tribal treaties, and other considerations. And then National Marine Fisheries Service does do a lot of the data collection, and they effectively implement the regulations and harvest specifications. I just want to mention that, yes, we have large trawl fisheries. We also have small fisheries. We have coho salmon runs. We have tribal treaties. We have aquaculture. It all sort of works by hanging together under this aggregated system that is effectively a sum of many pieces. All right, next slide, please. So the fourth point about co-management that I really want to emphasize here is that you need to have the data to directly support the management unit that you've selected for your fishery. And, this is not negligible in many ways, because without the data, you really can't make good decisions, or you have a lot of precaution you have to build in. So data comes from many sources. Yes, we have logbooks and VTRs and VMS. And we also have big white boats, as we call them, the scientific vessels that run the independent surveys aimed at getting the full life cycle of a species surveyed. But as you can see in the upper right-hand corner there, that image, the Northwest Fisheries Science Center partners with 10 commercial fishing vessels. These vessels conduct many of the surveys on behalf of and in partnership with the agency. They use acoustics, they use sensors, and they're active partners in this data collection. So it's really become a wonderful way of of sharing the cost and improving the robust and the trust. So acoustics, eDNA, these are all techniques that are being deployed. And again, they really are underlying the decision-making of fisheries in co-managed spaces. Next slide, please. All right, so we need an efficient and effective process that's both adaptable and flexible. And again, here you see a council meeting that's a full council, but underlying the full council, there are subcommittees that meet in between full council meetings. Those council committees receive information from advisory panels and the science and statistical committees. Now, the advisory panels are really important. Those are bodies that take on a specific fishery or fisheries management plan. And this is now the experts, the academics, the industry, the fishermen, the dealers, the processors, the tribal representatives. They all have a say at that advisory panel level, and they make recommendations up to the council committees and then the full council. So this enables that dynamic sharing and bottom-up co-management that isn't just a consultative process, but a direct partnered process. Next slide, please. I want to talk a little bit about enforcement and accountability. They're really key elements of a compliance and co-managed fishery. You know, voluntary compliance is obviously the best, and that comes often through education. But really, without compliance, we don't get trust and we don't get common ground. So deterrence and enforcement action are obviously things that we prefer not to look at. We like to see both a carrot and a stick approach. And one thing I'll just put out there is we've seen in the US where fully monitored fisheries might actually have new assumptions related to their stock assessment, that they can stand on reduced mortality, it's fully observed, it's fully monitored. They might be able to get a reduced mortality assumption in their quota setting. They might earn some extra days at sea through negotiation with their council. Again, demonstrating full compliance has its rewards in this council system. Next slide. Thank you. And then I come to my final point, really, which is you can have all of this structure, but without the human capacity to engage, negotiate, and collaborate, it's really not going to work yet. In New England, we were seeing council members, had bodyguards, chairs being thrown, unruly public comment that was off topic. And it was a real drain, both on the time, but also the trust. And so through education like the Marine Resource Education Program, where we bring fishermen and scientists together outside the neutral setting, and we explain the common language, we develop common acronyms, we understand each other's inner workings. The regulatory environment needs to understand what's going on with the fishing community. It's a two-way street. And ultimately, we need to know where the data are used and coming from so that we can empower everyone to contribute the data that will be useful in decision-making. Now, the MREP program specifically teaches to the council system, and we teach fishermen Robert's Rules of Order. We are specifically engaging them over 3 days of management and a 3-day science workshop so that they will go on and staff the advisory panels, that they will seek a council appointment. And over the years, what we have found is that this program now generates 40% of the council appointees nationwide. Much more when it comes to the advisory panels. And now you have knowledgeable partners in the fishing industry who are working hand in hand with the regulators and the scientists, and really we are achieving much better outcomes as a result. I will say this program has now become part of the fisheries management landscape at large. The government has funded it fully for the next decade. In all the regions, because it is such a critical element of enabling the stakeholder involvement and participation in a constructive way. Next slide, please. Great. So for parting thoughts, I just wanted to say, co-management is really doing things together where the government convenes, but also enables the voices of the industry, of the stakeholders in the decision process. It's not something that happens outside or sort of off in a back room. We really do it open and fair, well, I think fairly. It's not perfect, but it's effective. The UK has a lot of the same ingredients and cultural norms that I think would allow you to really look at this as a bit of a blueprint for how you might unfold this kind of an architecture in the UK. And just being really, again, putting a fine point on, management units can be formed around any community fishery and at multiple scales. You don't need to pick a one size fits all. You can use a hybrid and bring these together. It's really the convening and the threading together that is where the magic is going to happen, I think. So with that, thank you for your time, and I will stop talking.